and we're pretty full. Welcome. I'm going to start with a little piece of content strategy that I thought was pretty bang on. Someone took this death threat and turned it into a structured content model. It's got a built-in style guide at the bottom, emphasizes the outcome that you want to have, and anyway, that was brilliant. So we use this we're going to emulate this with some introductions, but without any death threats. So.
Okay. So hi, my name is Jen Harris. You killed my father? No, I'm just kidding. I'm a UX designer at Civic Actions, and during the talk today, I'm going to be doing some of our introductions of the ideas we're going to be discussing in the intro, as well as talking through a brief case study showing some of the work we've done with modular content strategy on DEA.gov.
Hi, my name is Ibekwe. I am the front-end practice lead in Civic Actions, and today I'm going to be doing a demo of how we took a modular content strategy and built a modular Drupal site from it.
I'm Kevin Walsh. I lead our UX service area at Civic Actions. I'm a Drupal developer for a while. And yeah, I'd like to know just a little bit, quick straw poll, content strategists here, Drupal developers. How many people do work consulting with government agencies? Maybe half. And people who work within government? The other half, right? Great. Okay, so this is the part where we describe this mythical beast, and then we tell you how to slay that beast. So that beast is Drupal bloat. Many of us have experienced it. Many of us are responsible for creating it in certain cases. Drupal is a very flexible platform that you can really easily add bloat to. But we're not talking about Drupal core, which some would argue has some bloat in it as well, just mainly focusing on implementations and how to avoid it during an implementation process. And it really often starts with content strategy. We're as guilty as anyone, I think, for adding bloat early on to a project, often by refusing to say no to people. And so just some of the things that are wrong with this beast. First of all, technical debt. If something breaks with your site, how expensive is it to fix it? Can you rebuild it? Can you upgrade one part of it? If it looks like this, probably not. What's the user experience of using it? If your site's got way too many features on it, can you actually file your nails with this thing? Or there's like 3 saws on it, I think. I don't think you could saw anything with it. I don't even know if this is real, but anyway. And then thirdly, the business value of your site. Why are people coming to it? If you've got so many features, you don't really know what's going on, unless you've built it incrementally. Few of the causes that get you to a problem like that. Actually, pass over to Jen.
Yeah, I'll jump in. We're going to kind of hand it off a bit. So cause number 1, lack of prioritization. So in other words, one cause of CMS bloat is managing stakeholders by adding to the content model. So rather than saying no or having a difficult conversation if a stakeholder request doesn't actually meet any user needs, we just say, oh, it's probably easier just to make that content type and add those fields and make this person happy, and then we'll deal with it later. But with too many of those sorts of things happening, you end up with CMS bloat. So it's probably for the longer term better to try to have those difficult conversations and really talk through the reasoning for why you might want to say no and come up with a different solution.
Another one is developers reaching for the content model to solve a technical problem. This is something I've seen time and again where the developer comes along and says, oh, I want the page to do this when somebody looks at it, or I want this certain business workflow. Hey, I can add a field or two and then build some logic off of that. That not only wrecks the authoring experience if they have to look at 100 fields that they don't understand, but also makes your content a lot harder to iterate on, to display in multiple different modes. Much greater likelihood that these random fields are going to show up in places where you don't want them. And then thirdly, top-heavy content models, and this is something I'm going to unpack a little bit, but so generally speaking, what I'm talking about here are way too many node types, way too many vocabulary types, and not focusing on more modular types of content. So on to the strategies. First of all, what I'm calling the minimum viable content model. It's kind of a riff on the minimum viable product, obviously. That model is a theory, and it's really it's a hypothesis, and it's made to be broken. But the goal here is to come up with the most beautiful and elegant theory as a content strategist. And it's hard work. You have to spend time after you've done your content inventory and quantitative and qualitative analysis. And really, the goal here is to get as small as possible, synthesize as much as possible, and get it to a point where it may not be the final point, and hopefully not, as your site's going to be growing, but get it to the point that you are able to achieve your most important business objectives with as little cruft as possible, and you can build up from there. So, yeah.
Yeah, so the next strategy, and all of these are related, obviously, but is modular content structure. So during content strategy discovery, which might involve content audits, interviews, and other kind of user research, you want to try to identify commonalities within the content model. So to do everything you can to abstract out any commonalities. So there may be, a content type over here and a content type over here, with different people sort of interested in those different content types, but as content strategists, we can start to look at where are the overlaps, what's common, and try to de-silo those content types. So we understand the whole and can start to understand where these kind of abstractions can be pulled out and broken down. There's an engineering sort of principle that is helpful to think about in relation to this, which is DRY, which stands for do not repeat yourself. And as content strategists, we're trying to incorporate that principle from engineering and thinking about this sort of modular structure.
So this is like a T-shaped diagram of what a modular content structure, content model might look like. Across the top are what I'm calling, there's probably a better word for it, but higher level content entities. So things like node types, vocabularies, media, those little asterisk on that one. So these are entities that typically would have a URL, have a path in Drupal. And then the other ones, and the two that we're usually reaching for these days, are either paragraphs or custom block types. So ones that are a little bit more modular, can be defined in one place and reused in many. And are a lot easier to iterate on, so we're going to provide some examples of that in a second. Media I put an asterisk on because for those who are familiar with media and Drupal, which is probably most people in this room, they typically do have their own URL, but most people use them in a more modular way, and there can be some challenges, but also opportunities related to that. So having media live kind of in both places. And in fact, really, anything on the higher level can exist on a lower level as well. So, creating inline entity forms that might create a higher level entity, but in a kind of more modular way inside another entity. So I like this quote. This Stephen Hay, I think, is an early thinker in responsive web design, and so this goes back about 5 or 6 years, but I think that the movement towards responsive is really what kicked off this component or modular based approach, and moving away from kind of page level thinking to smaller parts. And then I think the other great encapsulation of this is atomic design, and Iris is going to talk about this a little bit more, but the general principle of from left to right, smaller to bigger, and try to focus as much as you can, identify the things at their atomic level, and then atoms fit in with molecules, molecules within organisms, and so on, right up to the page level. Then finally, it's funny, when I was thinking about this, I was starting to think this kind of sounds like WordPress or something, and I almost see how like WordPress and Drupal have kind of come back together in a strange way now, where a lot of the more interesting kind of content approaches that existed in WordPress, and I don't really know what I'm talking about because I don't know much about WordPress, but in the sites that I've touched, this more kind of, if you're building the equivalent of Drupal views in WordPress, you would have it kind of available to you within the page, and you would kind of add it to your page in WordPress. And I think that kind of thinking was actually not a bad content editing experience. I think it makes a lot of Drupal developers cringe, or they used to anyway. But I think what we've seen is, we've always looked at WordPress as having a better content authoring experience, and I think that we now have some of those tools available to us, but in a much more sustainable way within Drupal, with structured content at the modular level. So yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about this and what you can call this on-demand or just-in-time content structure. Jen's going to talk about DEA.
All right. Okay, so DEA, as probably most people know, is a federal agency tasked with enforcing the controlled substances laws and regulations of the United States. DEA.gov is the externally facing official website for DEA and serves as one of DEA's main communication conduits with the public. Within the organization, there's a big emphasis on recruiting, and so the career section of the website is very high priority. But with this redesign of the site and moving to Drupal, DEA was interested in trying to appeal to a larger audience beyond folks who were interested in getting jobs, in particular special agent careers. So our involvement at Civic Action involved working with Acquia, who led the development, and providing design and content strategy for the redesign of DEA.gov for Drupal 8. And as you can see, the site was previously a SharePoint site with static HTML. So as you can probably imagine, there was a lot of inconsistent user experience across the site, and also it was extremely cumbersome for the folks who were trying to maintain content and update it. So the primary goal for the project was actually to streamline the content management process. That was the highest priority for the project, more so than the public-facing side of it, but that was the secondary goal, was to improve the user experience, make it responsive, which it wasn't before, make sure it was accessible. So it was, kind of just like bring it up to modern standards. So for the new Drupal site, we tried to keep the number of content types low. We had 12 content types, and then we used Drupal Paragraphs, which is a plug-in sort of solution, as Kev was mentioning, where content authors can actually choose when to add those to content types. So it was a way to keep the number of content types low, but also allow the kind of flexibility that content authors needed and were requesting. Okay, so the project, it had a very tight timeline for design. And so in order to mitigate the risk of not having a lot of time for user testing, we decided to use the very well-tested USWDS UI components as our baseline for the design system that we then customized for DEA to meet their specific needs. And as we were working on the content model and figuring that out, we identified a number of bundles of content that were really good candidates for Drupal paragraphs. And we made these paragraphs then available across the site on every content type. This is just a slide to show a little bit of the process that took place there. So you can see on the left we have, starting with spreadsheets, kind of figuring out, field level type details, then moving into lo-fi mockups, so doing wireframing to be able to iterate and get feedback and test out the ideas and develop the content types from a user interface perspective. And then finally, once that kind of stabilized, we settled on structure for some of these elements and the content types themselves. Our visual designer detailed a design system in a tool called Zeppelin. And I'm actually going to demo that in a second.
Oh, okay.
I think I can get to it. So, well, before I switch, this is a screenshot, and then I'm going to actually jump over to Zeppelin to show you a couple other components. But to start with, this is an example, the call to action block. And this was a high priority sort of feature or small bundle of content because it was used in a lot of different places across the site on different content types, including on the home page. And so we tried to reduce bloat by using a single component or single paragraph rather that we could offer different variations on depending on where it needs to show up and what the content author wanted to highlight. So the yellow highlighted one for submit a tip there on the right and at the bottom was originally a request from stakeholders just for the homepage, but we ended up implementing it such that any call to action anywhere on the site could be given a yellow border. So just to allow some additional flexibility. So how do we get?
It's on the left. I think. Yeah.
Okay. Great. Oh, but I can't see it. Okay, I'm going to do my best with
Maybe
navigating.
That screen's a bit easier for us.
Oh yeah, great. Okay. We're seeing something different on our screen than that. So this is Zeppelin. Oops, I just clicked one. Oh, good. That was the one I meant to click. So Kev mentioned the atomic design principles a moment ago, and that was the atoms, molecules, organisms, templates, pages, which Iris will get into a little bit more in detail. But for this little case study, I wanted to just show that the button styles, that would be an example of the atom, right? So that's the sort of smallest level. And then if we go back, and I can get to what I'm trying to reach. This is testing my eyesight too. Here it is. So this would be an example of probably a molecule. So it's kind of like in the middle. But you can see that optional CTA button is that atom that is one of those button styles. So the button styles stay the same no matter where they're placed, but you can sort of pull them into other larger structures like this one. And this hero could be also placed on any page throughout the site, with the button being optional, the title and description obviously being editable, and the image being editable by the content manager as well. Now, how do I go back? Nope.
To where?
Oh, sorry, to our slides.
Oh.
There we go. Thanks. Oops. Okay. And then just a little bit more about the process. So from Zeppelin and the sort of detailed design specifications for all of these small elements, the front-end developers took that and they created a style guide in KSS Node, and then used that to implement those styles on the site. And then finally, we use paragraphs, as I mentioned. These screenshots are just to give you a sense of 3 totally different parts of the site, the sort of uniform type of design and experience, but showing how the content managers are using these elements in different ways on different parts of the site. So in some cases, they're stacking tons of buttons, or they're using accordions. Some pages have accordion heroes and some pages do not. And this is all in control of the content author. They can sort of choose whether to use these elements or not.
All right. So I think most people know MSF, Doctors Without Borders. They provide medical assistance to people affected by conflict, epidemics, disasters, or exclusion from healthcare. Large organization with lots of sections around the world, relatively decentralized, and we work with their USA section. The primary business objectives of their website are to fundraise. They're mostly independently funded, to recruit medical and non-medical staff, and to something that was new to me at the time was to bear witness. So that's to kind of report back from these front lines. It's always been a big part of their mission. And for that reason, there's a pretty big emphasis on storytelling. So really incredible photography. I've butchered this screenshot. I'm sorry. But trust me, incredible photography and great writing, hard-hitting press releases, as well as first-person narratives. So that's a lot of their content is really driven by journalists so we'll talk a little bit about the process for establishing the minimum viable content model on this project. First of all, they already had a D7 site. It was a multi-site shared by MSF International. So there were like 8 countries or 8 sections that were using it. They had 31 what I'm calling these high-level entity types. We actually were able to turn off taxonomy in Drupal 8, which surprised and delighted me. We used nodes in some cases for what used to be taxonomies, but anyway, got down to 11 node types. I think this minimum viable content model had about 8 to start with, and then as we kind of progressed through an agile process, we added a couple more. And yeah, I'm going to mostly focus on the modular content aspect of it here. So I'm also going to try to like skip around.
It's hard.
All right. So there's a relatively waterfall process in a way. They had some really great designs that we could work from. It was relatively technology agnostic, so the designers kind of just wanted to tell the stories through design. And what I'm just going to share here is mostly the desktop. Let's skip down to M, desktop view of things. So they had I think they had 27 templates done in Photoshop and all screen sizes for us to start with. And there's a lot to go through and understand what each component did, and each component, or what I'm already calling components here, had some stakeholder that was interested in having it represented. So in this case, this is what they were calling a topic page. We didn't end up having something called topic. We kind of wrote that out a little bit. But each of these numbered items on the page represented something that we saw an opportunity to move into modular content. So maybe I should stay here, but I can barely see. So for example, this was a country page that was in crisis. So you can't see the background very well, but there's a little highlighted bit that represents when a country's in crisis and they're driving funding or attention towards that crisis. So that was something that can be turned on or off. That could be done in a modular way. A little bit down, there's some horizontal tabs you can't see very well. That was also done in a modular way with paragraphs, layout paragraphs essentially. And then the next thing was this 3-column item, another kind of layout paragraph thing with different pieces of structured content inside, 3 different pieces of structured content. And so although all of these things were designed for a country page, we could say, well, if we're doing it for the country page, why not have all of these things accessible and every other content type on your site? We don't have to do this just for your country page. So we made a lot of people happy, I think, with that, and that's one of the great advantages of this modular approach, is that someone comes up with a feature for one specific thing, and you can often find a reason to use it elsewhere. Jen had another example of a call to action, and that happened repeatedly here. They had sort of designed call to actions for specific places, and I think we had 5 different calls to action. And so each one of those calls to action became this thing that someone could place in, change the words, and it would have a totally different emphasis for whether it was fundraising or recruiting or I'm going to skip over to the content model if I can. This thing is a pretty ridiculous artifact of the content strategy process. It's a mind map, and you don't have to be able to read this, but the branches over on the right represent the 9 content types at first, and then some of them are split out into like subtypes, so sort of taxonomy, but unique to a single node type. So this is a way of kind of visualizing the different node types and their relationships to each other. And I don't know why this is displayed kind of funny here, but just so, for example, that one I showed a second ago, which was called the topic page, got broken out into medical issues, countries, and what we ended up calling focus pages. And then they were all relatively lightweight, not very many fields in them, as few as possible. I think we ended up, for those 8 node types, I think we had a total of 20 fields. Yeah, that's in a feature slide. But most of the stuff is over, and this is, I wouldn't call this a very usable document for a content author. It was more for our own internal purposes and some agile planning, kind of like a user story map in a way, but this is a visualization of the different types of paragraph types on the site. So, and we'll show some more examples of that in a second. I learned afterwards that there's this awesome module called Paragraphs Browser. I don't know if anyone's used it. I would totally use it in the future. It would do what this thing does on the left, but in a way that's actually usable within Drupal. Lets you visualize what your paragraph might look like as you select it, as you select the type. Anyway, that might go into a future release for MSF. So yeah, here's the same chart as we saw before with some of the node types across the top and some of these lower level content entity. I didn't include the names there, but like I said earlier, we used custom block types as well. I don't really follow this stuff all that well. I've kind of heard that custom block types are the future in Drupal, and we can have that discussion later on. Anyway, so here's a kind of a summary of what the content structure looked like between D7 and D8. The ones that I think are really interesting are that difference there, going from 150 fields on node types down to 20, and really pushing as much of the structured content into these more modular items as possible.
Quick question?
Yeah.
I noticed the last line on it actually went up fields on field collections and paragraphs from 20 to 43. Is that just because of reorganizing the content? Or?
Yeah, so we had field collections, and they had some field collections in Drupal 7. It's not really a one-to-one relationship between field collections and paragraph types, but anyway, I put them on the same row. And so just when I was counting this, I put, I kind of, for Drupal 7, I counted them there, and Drupal 8 on the right. But so what I wanted to emphasize here is that we tried to push as much of that content structure into paragraphs and out of nodes and out of taxonomy.
Right, thank you.
Over to Iris.
Okay. So after we mapped all these components, the first step we did in development was to create a library of reusable components all ready to be plugged into the Drupal site. So the idea was to be able to have all these components that we can use, but have them live in a style guide where we can do any edits we want to do there and just pull these components directly into the Drupal site, but keep the layout and the design focused on the results of the content strategy that are visible in the style guide. And we did this so that we could write code in the most efficient way possible and reuse what we called building block components, which are really the atoms and molecules, and kind of reuse them to build different types of Drupal page layouts. And that really gave content editors a lot of flexibility. Okay. And to do this, we use Pattern Lab and the concept of atomic design. And atomic design is using Pattern Lab as a convention for structuring the components in a way that allows a smaller component to be used to build larger ones. For example, you can have buttons, just like Jen showed. you can have a button, a title, and use it in different. You can use it in the hero section, or you can use it in an entirely different section, like a teaser. And this is an example of splitting up. This is a very old version of Instagram. So you have the little icons as atoms, and they can be used anywhere. And by the time you go up to the page level, you see kind of the complete page with all these atoms that build them up. And we can do a demo of the Pattern Lab site, if I can see this. I think it's right here. Okay. So this is what we had by the time we built out all the atoms, everything on the site. I can quickly. Okay, actually, this is an example of an atom, the form elements, and we just styled all these things in Pattern Lab, and they have associated tweak templates, which we won't go into here. But if you wanted to build a form in Drupal, you would take the tweak template that displays this form in Pattern Lab and just pull it into Drupal. And if someone wants a change, for example, wants the background of the select to be a different color, you could just change the CSS in Pattern Lab, and it would propagate and change all across the entire Drupal site. Let's see. Okay, I'm trying to get back to where we were. Okay. Okay, so I took an example of the components we built, and this is a hero component. It is used in every single page on the site, and there was just some sort of variation in each page where it is used. For example, the home page has only the title and subtitle, and a different page could have a drop down in there, but they essentially have common elements across all of them. And so we decided to just create one type of it and then reuse it all over the site. Another example of this were the card teasers. These were, if you go on the site, there are, excuse me, I was going to show different variations of the teaser, of the home component, the home hero. Like this one has a title and a subtitle, and it has this view photo link which shows you more details about the hero. And this is common across almost every hero image that we have. For example, this is an event page. You can see this doesn't have a title or a subtitle, and all of these are using the exact same component in Pattern Lab, but we just plug it into these different node types and kind of choose which fields we want to display and which fields should not get displayed on the node type. I think there's one last variation. The medical issues, this one has a select drop down, and all this stuff was built into Pattern Lab. We'll go back to the slides. Okay. The same thing happened here. We had one statistics component, like the one with the black background and 3 columns, but we could use it to display different things essentially. So this actually kind of broke down walls of, it was really a mind shift of when you do a component, is it going to be just a statistics component? How do you define this thing? At some point, someone will want to use it to highlight something else that's not a statistics. Like this, it was used to highlight a CTA or a call to action or a link. And it was interesting to see the different ways that content editors use these tools to create new things that were not part of the original design that they wanted to build. And the advantage of building these things in Pattern Lab was that we could, like I mentioned, make any changes in CSS. It's really simple. It's just a tweak template with CSS classes. And if someone wanted to change the color of the statistics highlighted numbers there, you would just do one line, change one line. You don't have to worry about the rest of the site. Or even if the layout was supposed to change and you want to add a new field to this, then you could just do that in Pattern Lab and then map the field to the paragraph you're using to build it, and it will get propagated site-wide. And we found out that doing this cut down development time a lot. At the beginning of the project, it took longer to ramp up because we had all these things to build, to develop. But towards the end of the project, we would estimate a card, put a story point on a card, and then we realized that we would just plug it in and we didn't have to do any more work. And the work really went really fast towards the end of the project, and that was really cool. So the Drupal 7 site had a different approach. That was the old MSF site. It has a completely different approach, and which is something we've all built in the past, where you think of things as pages. This page is going to look like this, and if you want an event page, you will just have events with a hero and text, and that's what you get on your page. So we threw all of that out and built this new site that had a plugin-based approach where paragraphs, or what we called content blocks, because paragraphs were, the name paragraphs was a bit confusing for content authors and people working with the site. So we just had this approach where we had very few fields, like Kev mentioned, on node types, but we had a lot of content blocks where people could just build different things depending on what they want to do. And that really expanded the possibilities of what they can do with the site. And an example of this, where we have different options for the edit form, and they could add a lot of different content blocks, is this page. And right here, this is also an example of how the fields in the hero get populated, for example.
Just zoom in.
Yes, please. Thank you. So right here, this title and the subtitle and the hero image, this is what they will do on every content type that has a hero, and it will display depending on which fields the node has. For example, some other nodes would have something more, I think, and then there will be more items displayed in the hero. And this is the basic body text. But this is the area where things really get different and unique depending on the page. For this specific page, they decided to add a 3-column layout, video, and they could come here and add so many other things. They could add FAQ, email sign up. There's a number of options, and not every content type has all the options, but we, in the course of our discovery, we figured out what each content type needed and created paragraphs and content blocks that would be put in there. So some content types had fewer ones, like the focus pages had fewer content blocks, and some, like this one, this is an article, there were just a lot of options for them to make this just really what they want it to be.
Can you just click on that drop down again?
Sure.
So I just wanted to add, one of the things that I wouldn't do in the future, but was helpful here, was we added that prefix so that it was sorted. Well, not quite alphabetically, because text we put at the very top, but that way, if you were thinking about CTA, you would see all your CTA options. If you wanted a layout option, they were all together. If you wanted a media thing, they were all together, and so on. And then some of the more advanced ones are down at the bottom, views. But like I said earlier, that paragraphs browser seems like a really great improvement. Even though this is an improvement over other paragraph forms I've seen in the past, the paragraphs browser, it's the same concept. You create a group, and then you add your different paragraph types to each group, and then it shows up visually within that.
Thank you. Okay. I'm gonna go to the next page. So this is an example where the initial design for the FAQ page was supposed to be just a couple of pages where people could where content editors could put in a number of frequently asked questions about careers, and then a separate page, an FAQ about maybe health related questions, And that was just it. That was the only place that people could see answers to questions. But when the site got created, we moved that content block. I'm trying to find the page here. We moved that section into a content block, and this is an entirely different page where, let me zoom this out a bit more. This is an entirely different page. This is a measles page talking about this issue, measles. So someone could come and read about it and see the statistics associated with it, and they could find questions and answers about measles here. And there are a number of pages where this is being used. We really ended up not having a specific FAQ page. This made more sense when we kind of expanded the possibilities of what could be done with the components that we wanted. Going back to the slides. And this is another example. This was the old events page on the D7 site. Every single event page looked this way. It had a video on top and text below. And if you wanted to find the details about the events, where the event is happening, you would have to read through the text to find it. So what we did here was we isolated some blocks on the events page from the design. And for example, this is one of them, the address component. So this is a different molecule all on its own in Pattern Lab. And it's now pulled into a node template. So this is the new events page on the Drupal 8 site. And that part of the page where the address is something that someone would, if they want to create a new event page, there are address fields they will fill out, and that will get displayed. And the hero too, just the same way as I demoed the previous heroes, you would upload an image and it would display it in this way. And this even has, I mean, there's a future possibility of breaking out this address component if the product owner says, okay, I have a different content type that uses addresses and I need it out of there. All we do is just take the component that has already been built in Pattern Lab and pull it into a paragraph type, and then it can be used site-wide. We wouldn't have to do any extra HTML or templates and all styling for it. And that's it. Component-driven development starts with a wonderful content strategy. Thank you.
This morning I read the talk description. It said something about migration, and we're not going to have time to talk about migration today for that part. I'm sorry. So maybe we could do that in the Q&A. Paragraphs does, and content strategy and migration are interesting topics to talk about.
What's the advantage of getting rid of taxonomy vocabulary?
I don't think there's an inherent advantage other than turning off a module always feels good, but in this case we just didn't need it. There wasn't really any kind of category that required. We used entity references to nodes. Someone will probably disagree with me, but I kind of feel like the way Drupal's gone in the last couple big releases, the difference is getting less and less important. You can build whatever you want with either now. And a reference is a reference. So I think it's more of a conceptual difference. Anyway, I'm sure there's a librarian who's about to kill me here, but yeah.
A similar question about the taxonomy. Did it affect your search results at all, or the performance of any kind of navigation?
That's a good question. Like not using taxonomy?
Right.
That's a good question. I know that there's been an overall improvement in search. So, but if we were to take specific examples and test them, we might find some interesting results. I know that they had a lot of duplication. So, for example, they would have measles as both a taxonomy term as well as a landing page. And anyway, there's another issue that they had with their older site. So they had taxonomy terms that were showing up very high for sure. The taxonomy term / whatever. I think SEO is not a big concern for these because they are such a big figure. They do very, very well. So if they've got a page about an issue and they're going to do pretty well with it. But yeah, it's a good. We should look into that.
Aside from the graph browser module, if you had to do it all over again today, what would you do different on this project?
On Doctors Without Borders,
Yeah.
we struggled. You know that T thing, that T diagram? There was, I think, like, I mean, the agile process is always difficult, and it's how you define agile. So we had 2 MVPs, I guess you could say, or their MVP had 2 components to it. One is the content model, and the other one was that our hypothesis was that this authoring experience would work for these users. I mean, our end users were really the staff of Doctors Without Borders. They know their end users way better than we ever could, so we didn't take on that role of end user researcher so much. But anyway, so our first, our delivery of our MVP was sort of at the end of sprint 2 or 3, and it kind of looked like that T, where you had 8 content types that were not all that developed, and one that was very developed that we wanted to really test with, which I think was article, right? And I think we struggled with that because we were shipping code that was not all done. So, but I think that it's hard to say whether what we would change about that. Like it led to struggle because there was some catching up to do with theming, but yeah, that we kind of started with that breadth as well as one a little bit deeper. I'm not sure if I'm explaining that very well, but yeah. Do you think of anything else?
No, please go ahead. No, that was basically just being able to ship discrete bits of finished work in terms of Agile. Kind of struggled with the fact that we needed to kind of create out that whole thing and see how it would work. So I'm not sure how we would do it better, but that was the struggle we had. Yes.
I saw that your solution to add new paragraphs. What was your solution to add existing paragraphs?
Like what, for example?
Like if somebody made an address and wanted to just reuse that same address in another event without having to create another address paragraph, how were you having them select that?
Yeah, Paragraphs doesn't do that very well. I think that's one of its biggest downsides, and I'm curious if other people have answers to that. I wonder if that's one of the reasons why people are starting to look at content blocks as an architecture that will help with that in the future. Yeah. But yeah, they're not very reusable. I mean, most of the hard work is with the media stuff, which was often within Paragraphs, and that's reusable. So hopefully, like, the rest is just text that you're having to type in again. But it's true that if people want to reuse something, they had to redo. That was not, do not repeat yourself.
The only thing that actually were able to reuse was media, like you said.
Yeah.
Pictures and videos. Those we could embed, but everything else was not.
Yeah.
How many paragraphs do you see per page?
We should go back and look. 5? The one, your example is 3.
Is that like usually low, the 3 we saw there? Is that like a higher?
I think it really depends on their content. I think that I'd say they do a lot of these long form articles with a lot of
pages.
probably more like 10.
Like 10.
Yeah. Mixtures of layouts. There's usually like a few 2-column things which don't really show to the end users paragraphs or content blocks, but are necessary to hold whatever's inside. Yeah. I was just thinking about reusable, modular content. One thing that we did, they had these pages that were showing the leadership of Doctors Without Borders, and we did decide to make those nodes to make them a bit more reusable because we saw that as. So that's maybe part of the answer. It's like that might be one reason why you want to elevate what would otherwise be modular content to a higher level, not as modular. But then you can still add that form either as a paragraph or in kind of inline entity form to make it available on the fly, either as reusable So there are ways, yeah, I think that's one of the answers to that, is to elevate whatever that is to something a little bit higher order.
I was just going to say bricks too is reusable and like revisionable paragraphs, and you can use it with paragraphs. So that's the model that we were looking at for comment.
The exposures.
And Layout Builder just got patched friendly blocks for reusable blocks as well.
Nice.
Or 8.6 and then 8.7 release more.
That's awesome.
Yeah, this is actually, we used Lightning for this, so we had all that stuff, but we turned it all off. So we wanted to focus the author experience on just this content block or paragraph-based approach for now. It's kind of confusing, I think, to add two different, approaches to doing a layout at once. So that was a decision we made at one point. But we kept all the other good stuff from Lightning.
Like media.
Yeah,
It is.
workflow.
Okay. Now, since there are any more questions, I want to say thank you. Have a good day.